Look, you don't want to just raise your prices. You want to be able to raise your prices, have more people say yes, and have those customers stay with you for longer. Most companies never raise their prices. They never charge more because they're afraid all of their customers are going to leave and all of their prospects will say no. Now, I've helped dozens of companies raise their prices and charge more for the same service. One of our clients just this year raised their price from $700 to now well over $5,000 for the same service and same offer on the back end. And ultimately, there are 5 key variables when it comes to charging more for your products and services. And in this video, I'm going to break down all 5 so that you can do the same for your business. So the first one is to know when to raise your prices. At what point should I decide when I should charge more for my service or product? There are 4 ways to know that you should probably raise your prices within your company right now. The first one is if you're closing more than 60% on the calls taken. Okay, so if you get 10 people that show up to your call and you're closing 6 of them paid in full out of the 10 consistently, and you've been holding that number, then it's probably time to increase your prices. I would rather close less of the people I speak to, but charge 20% more, 30% more, and have a lower close rate, because ultimately that's what's going to help you make more profit. Your close rate does not equal profit. What you bill your customers does. So ultimately in that case, it's just a math game. If you're closing 6 out of 10 people and you raise your prices by 30%, and now you start closing 5 out of 10 people because one of them says no because of the price, but you've made 30% more money per customer, your margins on the back end and your profit on the back end are going to significantly increase in spite of you closing less people per calls taken. And so the math just has to check out. And if you're not sure if it's going to work, just split test it. Just try it. Have one of your salespeople close it at a higher rate, or yourself close it at a higher rate, and see on the back end, how much did my close rate drop? And is the drop in close rate losing me more money than I'm earning from the prices being higher? The other thing you have to consider is that you have to service less people for that. So ultimately your cost of goods sold are going to decrease. Your operational costs within the company are going to decrease because now all of a sudden you're earning 30% more per customer. You can make the same amount of revenue, but profit way more on the back end with the same amount of customers. The second area that I would look to raise my prices is if a full financial quarter has gone by and I have not raised my prices once. For most of our products and most of our clients, we raise their prices usually once a quarter. So just incrementally so. Everything in the industry is getting more expensive. If you're selling like physical or services, your salaries are getting more expensive. All these things are increasing. Inflation is catching up with us. So every quarter, just raise your prices a little bit. Third is if your cost of goods sold is higher than 40%, I would look to raise my prices. So now this might not be true for every business, but for most like service, especially the digital, the online businesses, if your cost of goods sold is higher than 40% of your revenue, then just raise your prices 10 to 20%, and it's going to have a large adverse effect on your margins in a positive way. So I always try to keep within that 40, because then you can spend another 30% on customer acquisition costs, and then you've got a nice 30% to 40, 50% margin, and that's a really healthy business that you could run with. Now, hopefully if you're watching this, your cost of goods sold is not more than 40%, but if it is, I would just raise my price right out the gate, no matter what my competitors are charging, because likely I'm providing a much better service if my costs are much higher than theirs are. And if my service is worse than my competitors, but my cost is much higher, then maybe you need to do some restructuring internally so that you're not spending that much. The fourth time I would look to raise prices is if my competitors are charging much more than I am. Okay, I do not like racing to the bottom. I do not like charging the least on the market. I like doing premium work and charging more, but doing it better, faster, and getting better results for the clients that I'm working with. So if your competitors are consistently charging more than you, just raise your prices. Just at least match what they're charging in the marketplace, so you're not underselling or undercutting anyone, so you're not racing to the bottom on price and squeezing your margins. So always check those 4 triggers when to know if it's the right time to raise your prices and charge more. The second lever that we're going to cover here is knowing how much to raise your prices by. That's what a lot of people always ask, is like, well, how much should I be charging? So this is obviously always going to depend on the industry and what you're selling, but a good general rule to help you understand when you're raising your prices is there's these psychological barriers around the price of something. Okay, so usually it's around these kind of even whole numbers, but again, depending how expensive the things you sell, this might change. But usually the things we're selling are between $3,000 and $50,000, for example. So I know that there's psychological barriers at these kind of like round off even places. So at 5,000, at 10,000, at 15, at 25, and at 50, I know that there's these psychological barriers that if I'm selling the same exact thing and I cross that barrier, I'm going to have a harder time selling to the same market when there's competitors far below that barrier. Now, it doesn't mean you can't cross the barrier, right? Doesn't mean you can't go from 5K to 25K for the same offer, but you likely have to do something different and package it differently, or have a much stronger brand, or just do something really to separate you from your competitors. Okay, but the truth is if you're charging 5K or 5,500, for example, and you want to charge 9,500, you want to charge 9,000, you don't really have to change much, even if your competitors are still at 5K, because you haven't really crossed that psychological kind of barrier within the prospect's mind. And ultimately, you're still falling into the same category of pricing amongst your competitors or amongst what they're used to seeing or paying for that service. So that's just something to keep in mind, okay? When you want to raise your prices, you've figured out when, and then now you're asking yourself, well, how much should I raise them by? If it's been a long time since you raised your price, or you never have, you're likely going to want to do a bigger jump. Just keep in mind of those barriers, keep in mind of those round numbers, and try to stay within them. Or if you cross them, try to add more or package differently, or do something that's going to allow for the price raise and separate yourself from the competitors who are far, far below it. The third lever when raising your prices is you always want to use it as an opportunity to reactivate leads and leverage urgency within your sales process and your marketing. So I never raise prices without letting everybody know that the prices are going up. So what do I mean by that? You want to do a nurturing campaign to reactivate all your leads, a 5 to maybe 7 touch point sequence, email, SMS, and let them know that the prices are going up. You want to let your sales team know that the prices are going up, and so that they can reactivate all of their follow-ups. And then on their new calls with new leads, they can leverage it in the setting of the call that, like, hey, this is, by the way, this is the last chance that we're doing it at this price. Our prices are going up. And the cool thing is, when it's actually true and the prices are going up, it's a really strong sales tool. And you'd be surprised how many people are willing to buy over the phone versus wait a week when they know that it's going to cost them $1,000 more if they do wait a week. Okay. And you actually have to hold your sales team true to it, because if they have the integrity that they know the prices are going up, they're going to close it at a much, much higher rate. And then I would do it on my organic, like I would do a post on my, if you have a lot of organic, if you have some sort of following, or, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever it is, I would let people know that, hey, I'm raising my prices for XYZ reason, whatever it is. If you want to get in the last chance, you want to be in the last cohort at this price, you could reach out here, and then you have a simple CTA. When you're consistently raising your prices, you get to have a really strong reason to reactivate your list, create urgency for your list, and ultimately get a big spike in sales before the prices do go up. And then a lot of those sales, they are likely to not have occurred if you didn't do that in the first place. So even if you raise your prices and it lowers your conversion rate by a small amount, but you created this big spike on the back end, or before you raise those prices, then I would consider that a huge win. The fourth important lever when you're raising your prices is you need your team to believe in that new number. This is where I see so many founders go wrong when they raise their prices, is their team does not believe in the new value or the new price per value of what they're selling. Okay. So if you've been selling something for $5,000 for the last 5 years, and you've got a sales floor of 3 closers that have been selling it at $5,000 for the last 5 years, and you're fed up of undercharging, your competitors are charging $10,000 or $11,000 or $15,000 for the same thing, and you're like, hey, we're going to raise our price to $9,800. Now you'd think most salespeople would be bouncing off the walls because they're going to make more money per close, per call that they take. They're going to double their pay. You'd think that. You'd actually be surprised. A lot of people have these psychological kind of issues where when the price goes up, they have a harder time selling it because they don't believe that it's worth that amount. They wouldn't spend that amount on one call. So they're not going to be able to close it. And so you have to be sure that when you're raising your prices, your team is alongside you and excited about it, and they're pumped up and ready to close at the higher amount. If you don't think that's going to be the case, then as the founder, you can jump on the calls. You can show them that it's possible to close it at this higher amount. You jump on some of the calls, close it at the higher amount, get them some call recordings, get them some proof so they can be excited about it as well, and they know that it's possible to close at the higher amount. If they don't believe it's possible, if they think everyone's going to say no, then they'll never be able to do it. And then the caveat is that sometimes there's going to be people on the team that just cannot close it at a higher amount. They just don't believe that it's worth that, or they just would never spend that amount of money themselves, so they're going to have a hard time closing for it. And in which case, you just might need a new team. Okay, if you got a team that they can't go through these changes that you've been making, just get new closures on board and get people that haven't been selling it that way for the last 5 years and that are hungry and that have a chip on their shoulder and have something to prove. And you'd be surprised. I'm sure that they're going to be able to outperform the complacent team that doesn't believe in the value. The last lever on raising your prices is you want to be able to do this every quarter. Okay, so every quarter you want to raise your prices incrementally. All right. Obviously, if you're watching this and you haven't done that, you're going to want to do a larger one, right? If you're watching this and you've never raised your prices, yeah, you're going to want to look at some of the prior things that I've shown you and when and how much, and give yourself a pretty large incremental increase. But what I really recommend is just every quarter, which I kind of referenced earlier, every quarter you want to just bump it up enough to where you're consistently increasing your margin. Okay, like I said before, everything gets more expensive. Your payroll, taxes, your cost of goods sold, everything is climbing. So you should climb with it. A lot of people trick themselves into thinking because they're a service-based business, they're not raising their prices, right? When you're selling like these physical products, your supplier raises the prices on you, so then you raise the price on your customer. Whereas when you're a service-based business or a coaching company, it's a little bit more diluted. It's harder to tell exactly when I should raise them. But a good rule of thumb is every quarter, just do an increase of, let's say, 5%, right? If you're charging something at $10,000, hey, this quarter, we're just gonna raise it $500. And it's not gonna change anything on your sales floor. I can guarantee you that your sales team will close the same amount of leads, but you get 500 more per customer. And it probably won't help you make too much more money because, like I said, all the prices of everything else are going up, especially if you're scaling, because the leads will get more expensive. All of that will continue to rise, but it's going to help you keep your margins steady and stable as you scale. So those are the 5 levers when raising your prices within your organization. You guys were gifted with 2 locations today, half the video outside, half inside. So I appreciate you sticking through me with that. The important thing is, though, all of those things, everything here requires one thing to be true. It requires you the ability to be able to close the leads that you're speaking to. Okay, so if you cannot close the leads that you're speaking to, you cannot close at a good close rate on calls taken, then you will struggle to raise your prices. Or if your sales team cannot, you will struggle to raise your prices. So if you want help on that side, this video here, I explain the sales fundamentals of how I went from being one of the worst closers on my team when I was closing to then being the best closer and eventually moving on to become a C-level at the organization. So if you want to learn how to close more of the leads that you're speaking to when you've raised your prices, you're going to want to watch this video next. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I will see you all on the next video.